Do you know what volume 100 of One Piece is titled? The Color of the Supreme King. And guess who is on the cover of that? Of course, you have Luffy, you have Zoro, and you also have Sanji. Vin Smoke, Stealth Black, Black Leg, Sanji. People thought, okay, like one video? No. I told you there's gonna be multiple videos about Sanji. If you want to see my first one over here, boom, check it out. But this is another video talking about Sanji, and particularly the thing that's holding him back from being a Conqueror's Haki user. The previous video was about the kind of king Sanji will be in the future. This video is about the dam itself. What is preventing Sanji from becoming the best version of himself? And I said his name the way I said it before because it's, I think, an important detail in understanding what Sanji has to realize about himself in order to bust down that dam that is blocking the flow of Conqueror's Haki. That flow that he needs access to for what? For Luffy to be King of the Pirates. Luffy will not be King of the Pirates unless Sanji gets this in order. And what this is the version of himself that he has feared for so long coming to fruition. That is the core of the dam that blocks Sanji's Conqueror's Haki. Hold! Oh, we have something to talk about. A big announcement because the world, the entire world of One Piece has been brought to a new level via an island-to-island poster collection. That's right, travel posters that you can get for your wall, for your setup, for all the islands of One Piece. We'll talk about Skypiea, which is one of the best arcs in the entire series. If you say no, you're wrong. We're talking about Enies Lobby, Marineford, Whole Cake Island, Wano Country, and more. Literally all your favorite islands that you remember reading and watching in One Piece, from Windmill Village all the way to El Bafir. And the best part is that you can use my link to buy any of these 2 posters. And guess what? If you buy 2 posters, you get not 1, not 2, but 3 extra posters for free. You heard right. That is the deal for this month of July only. And if that deal titillates your soul, gets the blood pumping, then hit your boy's link in the description box down below to get your posters today while the deal lasts. So first of all, chapter 1187 of One Piece, when Sanji is thinking about what Scarborough Gaban told him about his Conqueror's Haki flow, he told him that he does have the potential for it. However, in your case, for some reason, and I quote by Gaban, you possess a streak of masochistic instability. You must be a king too if you truly want to make Luffy King of the Pirates. So those words, masochistic instability, what do they mean? Sanji has a tendency, for him mainly to emotional tendency, to gravitate towards things that you could argue are self-harmful or self-destructive. Of course, his main issue is with his family and what he is or what he's afraid of becoming. It is ironic enough that when you find out what Gaban says about Sanji, it winds up being the complete opposite of what Sanji himself said about Zoro in chapter 682 during Punk Hazard, where Sanji points out during that chapter that Zoro is pretty hard himself, but it was Sanji ultimately who was the hardest of himself among the monster trio, among the folks that have the power to be a Conqueror's Haki user. And a lot of this, I think, also in a way stems from Sanji's decision in Wano Country, where you could argue in some way kind of rebukes but also advances what he had achieved in Whole Cake Island. In Whole Cake Island, one of the core things that Sanji had to come to realize about himself is that it was okay being himself. That's actually one of the core tenets of the story of One Piece. It's okay being yourself. That's why when Brook fought against Big Mom, he knew that he couldn't save Sanji. It had to be Luffy. Only Luffy had the power to change Sanji's mind. And Luffy himself, we've known ever since Arlong Park. What'd he say? He told Arlong, listen, I can't snipe, I can't cook, I can't navigate, I can't use a sword, I can't do all these things, but I can kick your ass. Luffy, from the very beginning of the story, understood who he was, and he did not shy off from that. He committed to that, and he has done so ever since the beginning of the story. He knew what he was, and a lot of Oda's writing is centered around the idea that it's okay to be who you are. Matter of fact, even being who you are and committing to that through thick and thin is going to be the foundation for you to achieve your dreams in many respects, right? Oda's writing is centered on that in such critical ways. And Sanji and the crew, he struggles with that tremendously. And that was one of the key things in Whole Cake Island. Him realizing that it was okay being himself. Him being known as a failure in Germa 66, not going through the same mutations as his siblings, being trapped in a prison cell for X amount of time, being saved by Reiju, being freed in East Blue, and of course his mother's death as well. The kindness he experienced, his natural kindness. Sanji trying to figure out in earnest who he truly is something that he's struggled with but a lot of the story, more so in the post-time skim. But think about it another way too. What is Sanji afraid of being ultimately right now? He's afraid of becoming like his siblings. The version of Germa 66 that you hear in the comic books, where you have all the members of the evil army. One of the most feared, if not the most feared of that army was who? It was number 3. It was Stealth Black, with the ability to sneak in, infiltrate, espionage, assassinations, all these things. He was the most feared member in the comic books of Germa 66. And Sanji ultimately is afraid of being that guy. And that guy we can call essentially the warrior of science. This all really, I think, comes to a head in Wano Country in chapter 1031. In order to maintain the secrecy of their identities, he wore the raid suit to trick Page One and all those dudes because he didn't want to be recognized as a Straw Crew member. That was all the way back at the beginning of Wano Country. And you see him actually use the raid suit for the first time, and he hates it, obviously, but at the same time, it is very useful because he doesn't want to be a burden on his friends and, of course, maintain the mission at that point in time, right? So he wears that suit. He wears it a few times over during Page 1, in the bathhouse to try and protect Nami and company. Later on when he saves Momonosuke. It came in clutch for sure, but it started to change him. And this change he was terrified of because he thought that he was human. But his body was morphing. It was changing as a result of the raid suit's influence on him. So Sanji's genetic mutations were always there, but they were suppressed for a period of time until he wore the raid suit. And this comes to a pinnacle, an apex issue for him in that chapter 1031, when he believes that he was the one that attacked Osome. Osome, one of the geishas in the Pleasure Quarter. He was lost in thought running around because his body was changing, and he believes they actually attacked Osome. What did we see with Cosette during Whole Cake Island? His brothers beat the hell out of Cosette. So he's seeing his own family not only waste food, but also they're beating the hell out of a woman, which of course is against his own creed. But Sanji himself fears that mutation of being like them so much because he's afraid of losing who he is. There's a key panel that he says in this chapter where he makes his decision. Tell me, Luffy, he says, which would you prefer? The regular flesh and blood me who turns into a helpless wreck whenever I face an opponent who's a woman? Or a cruel, cold, emotionless warrior of science who can crush even monsters like him? As long as you give me the order, which one's going to be more useful to the King of Pirates? And then he makes up his mind and he destroys the suit. So the harsh reality that Sanji is experiencing to this day is that Sanji's body is modified, but his were suppressed for a long period of time. And the raid suit brought them out to the forefront. And even though his powers are amplified, he doesn't like his own powers. Even though for him, he has the power of love. He is the most human, the most kind, and he is someone that has a code of chivalry that he lives his life by. Within him is also the warrior of science, genetically altered his own body. That inner self-loathing, those inner masochistic instabilities, it's that. I think it's ultimately someone that doesn't like what he's become. He doesn't like his powers in that sense of his body having exoskeleton, having the same resistances to fire, having the physical traits that are enhanced, all that kind of stuff. The warrior of science is who he fears to become. Stealth Black, the warrior of science, is the thing. It's the dam that I think is blocking Sanji's Conqueror's Haki flow. And he has to take his time to overcome that issue. And in this moment against this fight against Killing Hand, you can argue, or maybe in the future per se, we'll have to figure it out, but he has to overcome Stealth Black. Maybe overcome is the wrong word. You can argue accept Stealth Black. You can think of it maybe in the same way as a Kurama and Naruto, as let's say a Asta and Libe per se, where it's not an actual entity, right? It's not a person side of him, but it's the fear that he has created because he's so afraid of being like his brothers. He's afraid of the Vince Smoke side of himself. He says it, do not call me Vince Smoke, but you are a Vince Smoke. You are a Vince Smoke, and that's okay. Even though in the name comes a lot of blood and history, that doesn't mean that you are like your family. Vince Smoke Sanji does not mean the same way as Vince Smoke Judge, Vince Smoke Ichiji, Niji, or Yonji. And Sanji Piece, episode 1061, in a visual way depicts Sanji's eternal struggles very well, because you can see how he sees himself in front of a pile of bodies. You can see how he's terrified of becoming like his siblings. You can see the war and bloodshed that Germa has caused, and he's afraid of being a part of that. And you kind of see that cut into the Shrek crew with Zeph by his side, the people that have liberated him from being just like his siblings. However, I do remember during Agate Island, when he took the attack from S Shark, he had a pretty savage face. And a lot of folks at that point in time were saying that Sanji may be mutating, and some Germa tendencies, their ruthlessness, their bloodthirstiness, could be subtly manifesting. And as time goes on, they're only gonna get worse and worse, because there's an idea that Sanji will be at some point like his siblings. And then what Sanji and Zoro talked about at the end of chapter 1031, and he's gonna need Zoro to kill him. That may come to pass in the future, though obviously I don't see Zoro killing Sanji in earnest, even if he doesn't become like his siblings and lose himself, because the mutations could be potentially progressing even to this day. And real quick, I'm just coming off the latest One Piece content creator every on Roger Bates' channel, and during that stream, Teking mentioned an idea that I love, where when I brought this theory video I was working on, Teking made a suggestion that maybe killing him would actually create a nightmare creature for Sanji, and that nightmare creature would be Stealth Black, in the same way as Link versus Dark Link. And Sanji beating him physically is breaking down the dam that holds back his Conqueror's Haki. The key thing here, I believe, honest to God, is going to be his mother's sacrifice. His mother's sacrifice, I think, ultimately is what saves him, because his mother was concerned about him being, of course, human. And for her, it wasn't the physique per se, it was his mentality, right? It was the fact that he had emotions. He could actually feel, he had that kindness. And those things were the key for Sanji that she was so brave before, not, you know, even if he did have his powers, that kindness and that kindness alone, the normal emotion of a normal human being, that and that alone would have made her extremely happy, right? Powers be damned. And Sanji has to kind of realize that, where he is a Vince Smoke. At one point in time, he was Stealth Black, but that's okay. That's okay. He has to break down that dam that is Stealth Black. So for me, I think that we're gonna probably see a lot of points that are visited in Whole Cake Island and in Wano Country. Mainly what he said about, you know, him being the warrior of science. We're gonna, I think, see that brought up during like it's killing Ham, if that fight continues on, obviously. And we're gonna see Sanji really try and focus on what it means to be himself and accepting who he is. What he said about Zoro and Punk Hazard, I think he has to come to grips with himself. He is the harshest on himself, and that in this situation is a bad thing. So we'll see Sanji, I think, tackle these things in a very deep, meaningful way, because Oda loves Sanji, and I believe that we will see maybe him actually utilize or try and figure out some things that could be incorporated, and it could be, you could argue, not just a power-up for his Conqueror's Haki, but for other abilities that he has that are Germa in some way, and then they could also blossom too. So that is the dam that holds back Sanji's Conqueror's Haki. Let me know your stance on the subject matter hand. If you enjoy your boys' video content, remember to get it first, and of course, subscribe to the channel itself. Click on that bell to join the notification squad. I'm catch you guys and gals on the flip side.